Welcome to Off the Coast, where we examine the views from Vancouver Island with your host, Rosemarie Barnes. New and exciting things, preserved and respected things, business, recreation, politics, travel, all from the point of view of the people living and working on the island. Rosemarie is a professional speaker and certified speaking coach living in historic Ladysmith and loving every day of the island life. Here is your Vancouver Island host, Rosemarie.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your host of Off the Coast, Views from Vancouver Island, Rosemarie Barnes, the maverick voice at Confident Stages. The island life is an amazing thing. It is so different than any other part of the world that I've encountered. And I grant you that I'm not exactly a monumentally well-traveled person. Nevertheless, I find Vancouver Island to be particularly special. Today, we were to have heard from our guest, Mark Corbett, who has done some fascinating things. Mark is not able to be with us today for reasons that we will ascertain in just a short while. But let me tell you that he has spent 20 years in tourism on Vancouver Island, that he owns his own adventure company, that he worked at the Vancouver Island Museum and doing radio and television appearances. He ran the Bastion while at the museum. And for those of you who don't know, the Bastion in Nanaimo, right on the waterfront, was in fact the lookout for the whole town when it was originally a coal mining port. He helped politicians on their award-winning campaign. He loved Justin Trudeau. And right now, drawn by his love of beauty of this incredible place, he is en route to Tofino, where he is going to be doing similar activities. Today, though, we're going to be talking about something a little bit different. Today, I would like to talk to you a little bit about changes in leadership that I am seeing take place, not only on Vancouver Island, but all over the place. So I thought I might share with you some ideas of where things are going and why people are so confused. Being a business owner, an employer, or a leader in today's business world requires an awareness of the different needs of the generations. Now, under the same working roof these days, it is possible to have Generation X, Generation Y, Generation Z. We might even have some of the baby boomers, and we do, in fact, have some of the baby boomers still hanging on just before they get to retire and enjoy some of their well-earned retirement. Every one of these generations has a completely different attitude toward work, what it does for them, what it means to them, and therefore in the workforce, trying to motivate all these different people with one leadership style is running into big trouble. So what we need to have then is an awareness of what each generation needs. We interact with people of all ages in our businesses, in our personal lives, our social lives. And whether we're engaging with our staff, our clients, or our children, understanding the differences between values and what motivates each individual group will make you a better communicator, a better employer, a better parent, a better business owner, and possibly even a better friend. Now, using gross generalizations, and I do say that, and it's only to make a point as a starting point for conversation, Generation X tends to prefer carefully funneled information. They want to know what they need to know to do their job to the absolute best of their ability. And a great number of them didn't want to know what went on in other departments. They were there to do their job and do it well. The millennials, or Generation Y, feed on mentorship and praise. And then there's Generation Z, the latest that are just now beginning to hit the job market. They're demanding respect for their technological prowess and their ability to see big picture, condense it into a small one, and blast it forth together in a clearer version. The old version of decision-making and leadership, whether right or wrong, is being threatened, and leaders and managers are reeling without knowing how to cope with it. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, change is inevitable, and it is occurring faster today than ever before in history. Consider, once upon a time, humans lived in caves and communicated through body language and the occasional grunt. The discovery of fire caused massive change, as did the invention of language. We evolved from searching for food to cultivating it. The ripples of change resulting from the invention of the printing press quickly turned into a tsunami of written communication. It really wasn't that long ago, it was in the mid-50s, that women were finally deemed to be people and not mere possessions. And consider the upheaval that generation caused for the one that came before, when women were struggling for the right to vote. Some generations, of course, have caused much more of a ruckus than others. At this moment, it's the millennial generation, Generation Y, that's been getting a lot of bad press. Entitled, self-absorbed, unfocused, are some of the typical adjectives swimming around in the sea of negativity describing our majority generation in today's workforce. They cannot survive without their cell phones, have grown up playing video games, and expect the world to revolve around their very self-centered heads. They need instant gratification. They can't make a decision without consulting everyone they know. They're generally lazy, expect respect just for showing up. Now, for anyone that's older than 40, I ask you, does this sound at all familiar? It should. Because similarly harsh criticisms of each new generation have rung through the rafters time after time after time. Think back to the panicked parents of teenagers when chubby checkers became popular. Remember the rebels that were created by the Beatles? And what about the sacrilegious burning of draft cards? Think back through history. Young upstarts have created chaos with every passing generation, and for that, we should be absolutely grateful. Without new and innovative ideas, nothing changes. And without change, we first stagnate and then fall into ruin. Did Thomas Edison's peers cheer him on to create the first light bulb, or did they quietly snicker behind his back? Can you just imagine what Bell's family thought of their son wasting time by dreaming up a contraption to talk to someone who wasn't even in the same room? Is there really anything different about what this generation's progress has? Is there anything much different between now and what's happened in the before? Yes, and yes again. While our Generation Y group may well be entitled and demanding and even arrogant, let us remember that we raised them to be special because special they were. We brought them trophies even when they lost. We rewarded them for anything and everything they undertook. By buying them electronics, we taught them to understand the world of quick responses and have instant information and instant gratification at their fingertips. And they took advantage of every opportunity to learn the complex world of computers, and we praise them for their ingenuity in solving problems in a flash. We provided cell phones so we could keep in touch with them. And they took advantage of that technology to keep in touch with the world and with each other. Never before has a generation made such advances in such a short time. But every generation has changed the ways of the world. Generation X caused a huge disruption, Generation Y even more so, and now enter from stage left, Generation Z. If ever there was a group more poised, ready, and capable of making great advances and massive improvements to our planet, I don't think I've ever met one. Where previous generations were fearful of change and determined to hold on to the status quo, Generation Z view massive change as exciting and even normal. Generation Z have never known a world without cell phones, computers, multiple personal devices all at the same time. Generation Z are being raised amid institutional and economic instability. They're informed by the looming shadow of depleting natural resources and global warming, and are globally connected via the social networks. They have always had information at their fingertips. They're masters at analytics and are poised to change the way the world does business. Now, there's a lot of reasons for this, but primarily, they've never known a world where the Twin Towers still stood. They've never known a world without constant information being bombarded from every direction. And so what's happened is that Generation Z have become masters of taking all manner of information coming from multitudes of sources, sifting it down, analyzing the content, and deciding for themselves what's appropriate and what's not, and what's to be believed and what's not. Now, just for sake of clarification, I'd like to give you a few years to consider what years it is we're talking about. So we had the boomers, the baby boomers, who were post-war. But that category is very large, so it's actually been divided into Boomer 1 and Boomer 2. Boomer 1 was 1946 to 1954. And Boomer 2 went from 1955 to 65. And the reason for the change is, can you imagine the difference in values, the difference in thinking, the difference in information that would have run between 1946 and 1965? So many things took place in that era that to clump that group of people into one group is ridiculous. So it was changed. Generation X were born between 1963 and 1980. Generation Y, approximately 1980 to 1994. And Generation Z are our younglings that have been born from 1995 and on. Now, these dates are not, of course, cracks in the sidewalk that you have to jump over. They are approximations and dependent on so many things, whether you were raised in the city or the country, whether your parents were well educated or self-made, whether you were the discipline techniques that were going on, what you heard from radio and television. There are no hard and fast rules, of course there aren't, but just some general guidelines to help us understand. One of the great things that really makes a difference is how groups like their leadership to be presented to them. Generation X, for example, really flourished by following leaders they perceived as being fair, who gave any positive feedback. Back in those days, you see, leaders who offered mentorship were rare, and when there was one, they were highly valued. Leadership to Generation Y, on the other hand, is quite different. For Generation Y, they prefer to follow leaders who are honest, with integrity, who treat them with respect. They need to know the big picture so they can understand their roles within it. To get Generation Z to follow leaders, we have to understand that that generation will absolutely not abide respect through fear authority. They'll follow leaders who value ingenuity and diversity and allow them to be responsible for their own ideas. Generation X are known as the cowboys. They're rugged and individualistic. They like individually focused work. They viewed their managers as experts. And they like their information funneled to them. They looked inside to find perspective. Generation Y are the collaborators. They're group-oriented. Active, involved leadership involves collaboration and teamwork. Leaders are viewed more as coaches and mentors than as bosses. And this generation prefers lots of information, unstructured, let it come to me. They looked outward to put their own perspective in perspective. And then we have Generation Z, most commonly known as the diversifiers. This group is aware of every move their colleagues and their friends make. They like open-ended leadership. They're entrepreneurial. Their information flow is constant and always changing. This group is leading to create the big picture and not be informed of what it is right now. Consider just a minute the difference in how these different groups had to do research, whether at school, whether at business, whether for their own social amusement. For Generation X, conducting research required a trip to the library and the use of the index card file. Now, this even predated microfiche. Say microfiche to even a millennial or a Generation Z, they might look at you as if you've just grown a third eye. But that was the days when to conduct research meant going to the library, going through that monstrous card catalog to find out what was there and what you could use. If it wasn't in the library, you might be able to convince the librarian to order it for you from another branch, and in 2 weeks it would arrive. Cell phones, if there were any around at all, weighed about 1 kilogram, were the size of a brick, and held a great whopping 30 minutes of talk time. Research for Generation Y was substantially different, of course. They could open up multiple tabs in a browser while simultaneously playing a game of Angry Birds. Rewards and information were instantaneously. For Generation Y, life is more circular and optimistic, like a Ferris wheel, with lots of opportunity to stop, take a picture, post it to Facebook, and then carry on around the wheel. For Generation Z, research involves customizing the information which they seek and then customizing the results even more. They have multiple mobile devices, are constantly connected to the digital world. Their life experience is to create new paths. The structure is very different. Generation X really liked things structured, clear. They knew where they fit, they knew what they had to do, and they did it brilliantly. Our millennials prefer much less structure. Flexibility is the highly valued piece of this puzzle. For the Zeds still coming up, they want it to be customized to every situation because it is always changing. Generation X worked for job security. Nothing was more important than the the knowledge of a paycheck coming home at the end of the week. Generation Y is more interested in employability. What skills do they need? What skills can they transfer? If I can do this here, can I transfer that to a completely different area but still be successful? For Generation Z, they want the experience. They want to grow from it, and they want to come to their own startling, new, and innovative conclusions about which direction that can go. Work equaled income for my generation, and that tells you how old I am. For Generation Y, work equals income and personal enrichment. And for our up-and-comers, work equals income, personal enrichment, and personal connection. Very, very different points of view. Finally, Generation X requires that you earn their loyalty with each and every meeting. It was a challenge to keep them because they are unforgiving when disappointed. They won't give you a second chance. Generation Y come from a world where everything changes all of the time and seldom with warning. To keep them engaged, they require a diversity of activities. It's what they were raised on. Generation Z have always had information at their fingertips. They're masters at analytics, and are poised to change the way the world does business. They were raised amid institutional and economical instability, and they have learned to cope in a brilliant manner. Young people push boundaries. Throughout the ages, young people have always pushed boundaries, in some generations more than others, but that's what young people do. And it's good that they do. It's right that we do. The pendulum swings from one extreme to another, moving quickly from children being seen and not heard to being the very center of their parents' lives. Perhaps it'll swing back in years to come. For now, however, it's wonderful to see the confidence of our newest breed of humans. We've taught them to be unafraid of trying new things, of looking for new and easier ways to accomplish everything, to set goals and believe they can reach them. Yes, indeed, it is harder to manage and lead people who know more than we do. And yes, they do things differently than we did. And thank goodness for it. Right now, can you imagine giving up your cell phone or your computer? Even those of us who weren't raised on the technology find it difficult to divorce ourselves from the cell phone and even leave it on at such things as concerts and the like, in case that important call comes in. Imagine life without the medical advances we now consider to be commonplace. In the time of the bubonic plague, the idea of antibiotics would have been considered witchcraft. Thank goodness the newer generation fought through that fear and actually investigated. Now imagine the fantastic possibilities that are still to come from our new generations. It's an exciting world, and things are happening ever so quickly. If you have a nap, you could wake up to find out some new invention has just been announced. To be fearful of the change that the younger generations wish to bring in is to be fearful of life. And when fear rules, nothing good comes of it. So that's my opinions about understanding the great generational divide. There are so many people who are trying right now to do so much good. There are women's groups still sprouting up everywhere to help women continue their battle for equality. There are networking groups available. Yeah, you can't swing a dead cat without finding another networking group. There are multiple ways of keeping in touch with all manner of people. I'd like to mention, just perhaps for a moment, the idea of self-care. We are so worried now to not be labeled as negatively as Generation Y, that the very idea of taking too much time for self-care has different ideas attached to it. It takes confidence to go for what you believe in. It takes confidence to change. It takes confidence to know what you deserve and what your goals are. Do you have the confidence to renovate, reinvent, or reposition yourself or your company when it's time? Are you so confident in your values and your beliefs that you can confidently navigate potholes in the road? I call this a GPS attitude that allows you to recalculate, refocus, and redirect. I'd like to share some of those ideas with you. It would be virtually impossible to find someone who's never endured a confidence-rattling situation. Somewhere, sometime, I'd wager that we've all had our feet knocked out from under us and been faced with the soul-shattering opportunity to re-examine what we believe, why we believe it, and to what lengths we will go to defend it. That is the definition of values. Upon reflection, it's impossible to not change your values as life circumstances change. And we have had, over the course of our lives, had to change our beliefs to accommodate new knowledge and new circumstances. It's never easy to let go of something we once believed to be true and absolute, and even harder to trust a new belief paradigm. When faced with any change, small, large, we may find ourselves fighting the outcome. We may find ourselves clinging to our prior beliefs, because whether they're reasonable or not, whether they still benefit us or not, they are familiar, and in familiarity, we find comfort. Once we have made up our mind, we will go to any lengths to defend it rather than having to admit that we were wrong and change our belief structure. Yet we always have choices. For every thought, every decision, every action, every reaction, we can choose to accept the new idea, we can choose to ignore it, or we can amend it to suit our needs. I call this the TLC Principle. We can take it, we can leave it, or we can change it. Accept the new thing, adopt it, move along with it, take it. Leave it. We can ignore the new information, remain unaffected by it, continue on our previous path. Or we can change it. We can examine this new thing, weigh it, measure it, accept the portions we like, amend others to suit our purposes, and reject those that do not. That being said, though, we can't do any of the TLC options without the confidence to do so. And therein lies the crux of this issue. Confidence is a tricky business. Too little and we can feel trapped, helpless, victimized. Too much and we can be perceived as aggressive, even arrogant. We can become unaware of potential pitfalls as we move toward our goals and even become heady and foolish with our overinflated opinion of ourselves. Confidence isn't static. It ebbs and flows with circumstance and experience. The trick, of course, is to value the positive education that stumbling has to offer us, just as deeply as understanding the reasons for our successes. Armed with the new lessons we learn along the way and we file them away securely, we can then more clearly and confidently choose to stay on our previous course, take a slight detour, or decide to take a completely different path. Coming up very soon in the booming and wonderfully peaceful metropolis of Parksville on Vancouver Island, the community has an opportunity to witness and partake in a marvelous celebration of coming to know yourself, coming to realize your potential, coming face to face with what you have to offer the world. On May 13th and 14th at Tinamera Resort and Spa in Froch Alicious, in Parksville, Joe Dibley, a phenomenal woman, has organized an event called Froch Alicious. Joe is the author of the best-selling book, Froch Off. Take from that what you will. It's her story of coming out from hiding for a number of reasons and taking charge of her own life. At the event, she's going to share her own story of surviving and thriving. Her story is one of extraordinary courage and conviction to overcome seemingly insurmountable odds toward achieving her own happiness and live in her true colors. Jo has made it her life's work to lead and help other women find their own strength and conviction and create their own positive paths, leading in their own strong footprints and leaving their own strong footprints for someone else to follow. Now, at the event, there's going to be a variety of speakers and events, and participants will be given tools to become and remain confident and tenacious in their callings. I have the extreme pleasure of making a contribution to the event. My own presentation is called Speak Your Passion, wherein I share some of the most critical aspects of making yourself heard to everyone that needs to hear you. And additionally, making yourself understood when you have to speak in public. Speaking public is universally greeted as being the second greatest fear of humankind, second only to death itself. Now, I've seen the lineup of the presenters and the activities you do want to attend. So make sure you find Froch Alicious on your website. Come on out and join us in Parksville on May 13th and 14th at Tinamera Resort. And be ready to take your frock off and discover the real you. Ladies and gentlemen, today's show is by necessity going to be a little shorter than we might have expected. I hope you've enjoyed my little personal rants on various topics, and I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday when our guest will be the one, the only, the inimitable Mayor of Victoria, Mayor Lisa Helps, who will be sharing her personal views on what she sees as the island's successes and challenges, what she sees as the future of the island, and in particular her hometown, Victoria, and what she sees as Vancouver Island's place in British Columbia, in Canada, and more globally. Please join me next Wednesday on Off the Coast, Views from Vancouver Island. I'm Rosemarie Barnes, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you for listening to Off the Coast, Views from Vancouver Island, with host Rosemarie Barnes. To book Rosemarie as a speaker or speaking coach, or to offer suggestions of extraordinary guests for the show, please visit her website at www.confidentstages.com.